creates a nice finished edge. Oh, that's a messy one. But it creates a nice finished edge on your fabric. So this is a really professional way of finishing off your seams, because you never want raw seam or raw edges in your seams. Even if that's only ever on the inside of your garment, you see the inside of your garment. So you don't want to, whenever you put on a outfit or any garment, you never see these raw edges of your seams, do you? If you do, it probably hasn't been very professionally made. So we always need to use some technique of sealing them off. If you've got something lined, so my jacket is lined, the seams would not all be overlocked on all of the insides where it's lined, but I just noticed this bit here, because the lining comes out, that seam is overlocked. It's also really important to overlock because your fabric could just fray away. Those raw edges of the fabric will just, over time, especially if you're washing the garment, over time those raw edges are just going to fray away to nothing. So my overlocker is just, all it does is create this. That doesn't do anything else, but it's wonderful for what it does. As you can see, overlockers are very complex in their threading, and it's even more complex when you get down there. We never unthread the overlockers. If we do need, so if one of these threads runs out, all I will do is get another one before it runs out. So if I start to see like little bits of the green showing through here, I don't worry about wastage. I cut it off there, I put another one on, and I pull it through. That's so much easier than rethreading the whole thing. That being said, the most complex ones on these couple of machines also have a really annoying tendency to come unthreaded very easily. So you do need to be quite careful in how you sew. I'll explain that as I go. So a few other things to point out. That should be sitting over there. There is a blade here. So that is a very, very sharp blade. I want to keep my hand very far away from that when I'm sewing. That's I think the thing I'm most nervous about in this room is somebody going over their hand in the overlocker. Anything that is overlapping this edge when I sew is going to get trimmed off. That is a good thing in some ways, because we want to trim off these little really loose frayy bits. That can be a bad thing if you've accidentally got your fabric coming up under here and you don't realize it's going to get cut off. It can also be a bad thing if you are not paying attention and you go too far in. It's going to go past your seam and you're going to end up with a different shape to that piece of that pattern piece. So this has a presser foot too. It's really far around the back. It's actually a little bit more awkward to get to than the sewing machine ones. So I put the presser foot down. There is no back stitching on this machine. All we have to do is go for it. Now, the places to keep your hands would be here and then directing the fabric down here. I can go a little bit further in if I want to cut off more. I don't want to go too much further out, and I'll demonstrate why. If I go too much further out, it actually comes away and the threads don't catch onto my sewing. So that is your closed seam. We call that a closed seam because they're both overlocked together in one thing. And if I'm then ironing that seam, I would have to iron it to one side, and I could choose which side I wanted to iron it to. It does make a difference on your finished garment which side, because you can see it kind of gives a bit of a roll to this over. So the side that I've put my seam allowance on actually looks a bit thicker. So sometimes you actually want to use that technique. The other sample you're going to do for seams is an open seam. This means that I overlock each one separately. Some people like to do this by overlocking before they even do the seam, but that can actually sometimes, in some fabrics, stretch the fabric out of shape before you've even had a chance to sew the seam. Now, when I'm using these, I want to be really careful that I'm not tugging at it or pulling it this way. So I really need to let the fabric just be taken through. So the overlocker will do that for. I could just, I want to direct it, but I could just let it go. I don't have to be touching it. I run it off and then I cut it, leaving that excess hanging out. I need to do this to the other side as well. really careful. I just felt that that was just sneaking under there a little bit. I want to be really careful that I don't do that. And there's my open seam. I want to go and trim off those edges. They won't fray. They might, you know, 1 or 2 stitchings might come out of it, but they really won't fray. So this one I would iron opened. So I would iron like that. You've probably seen that look on garments before. Anyone seen that before where you've got 2 seams? That was what I saw on my jumper today, my jacket. That's been overlocked and pressed open. So that's an open seam. So this is what I want you, stop it.